Hi there, this is part two of Grails queuekit plugin. I want to talk about the configuration values of the plugin. So by default, I provide you with a file called sample config in the plugin itself, and you're going to need to copy the block called queuekit out of it and into your config.groovy, which you can either go to one of the demo sites and copy one of those ones, which has got none of the comments, um, or into your application.groovy if you're on Grails 3, and just paste it in and then change what you need to change. So we'll talk through what they are through the one that's got the comments, and you'll be able to kind of read it as I'm talking through it as well. Keep alive time is the amount of time to keep the thread alive, or the current thread that's been sent to it, the live running one. Core pool size is the size of the pool to set as it starts, and I've found that I think you need to set both of them to be the same. So 3 is what we've defined. Maximum is 3. That's what we want to have jobs running as. Max queue is the amount that can be queued whilst there are jobs running. So beyond that, they'll get rejected. Preserve threads is, we've kind of covered it in the last video. It's basically to do with users that, threads that you want to preserve for a priority above the priority group that you set. So if you have 3, you could have 1 that's sitting there and does nothing and waits for higher jobs. The mediums are high and highest to go through, whereas if they're medium or lowest, they will only use 2 out of the 3. And that's what it's supposed to do. But I've been having some problems with that today, and I've done some changes, and I think it's related to the changes because it has been behaving. Report download path is the path that the files that are generated for the reports for your users that they download from, that the files get stored to, and a /folder user ID is created, and the files are put into each user ID's folder. So make sure that path is obviously not temp if it's going into production. On a Windows system, it will be something like this. If you have defined this, then you don't need to define this. You only define this and set it to something other than this, or something equals Windows if you want it to default to this and you haven't set to this. It's a bit bizarre because just set this and forget about this. Removal day, this is related to a cron. Removal download day related to a cron job that you need to schedule. It's within the plugin. Buffered, the information's, the stuff is in the plugin for you to add it to a quartz job to run. So it's not that I've provided you with quartz and the scheduled job. That's for you to write that bit. But if you were to write it to clear up your reports, then you'd call delete report files, queue report service, delete report files in that quartz job, and that will go off and according to the values remove the files from the system to keep your system clean. Buffered writer types, we kind of covered that in the last video, but the type of the output that the file is gets generated through, and this is the default typically, but if you've got another one that behaves like this, then add it. Otherwise, it will try and attempt to write it to a file like it's an XLS or a PDF, I guess. Report priorities, this is the default priority that you define, and it's a generic priority given to a report that it falls back to. And if you don't define it, it falls to low, I think, for every report that's not defined. And it's, as I said, it's a generic rule because that was primarily the method that we came up with. But when you have a form that people have input through and they can select parameters to request the form, they may request it from 2012, and that might take all year. Whereas if they requested it from yesterday till today, it's going to speed through and produce it just like in a second. So whilst this gives you a generic rule, it's you have other ways of overriding it based on the parameters that have come in. Default report queues, what method to use with the the default technology to use as such. Now, I'll quickly, I don't think I covered it in the last video properly, because the plugin provides you 4 methods: array blocking, link blocking, priority blocking, and enhanced priority blocking. These are the default methods, and this is my method. This method is actually more costly. With each thread, it launches another subthread, so be aware of that. And that then allows you to be able to delete the running task, whereas with these ones, it launches its own thread, but once it's executing, you can't delete it. So it's up to you which system you prefer, but obviously this is more costly, as I've just explained. Both priority and enhanced priority support this rule of preserving threads, or should do, and if there's a problem, I need to fix it. Duration threshold is to do with coloring the screen with different colors based on how long a report took, and you can configure that in hours, minutes, seconds, or minutes, seconds, or seconds, and color. And you give it a color in each case, and if it's over that period, then it will color the cells. Kill long running tasks, that only relates to enhanced priority, and it kills over that amount of time a task that's been running, and it kind of gets triggered by another task that arrives, and it will go off and check, have I got a space for it, have I not, is there a job that's been running beyond this, let's kill it. Default comparator, obviously if you set it to 0 or not set it, it's off. Is the default comparator is basically your comparison method for priorities, and if it's set to true, then it will use the default out of the box, is this priority higher than the other. If it's set to false byte, which is by default, it will use my crazy method of trying to work out through queuekit helper, and that kind of, it works with this stuff, the preserve priority and queuekit helper. Then if that's disabled, it tries to use change max pool size and resize or shrink or increase the priority, the size of the pool based on what the priority is and what the configuration values for flood control and limiting users above priority, which you haven't got to, is, and all the rest of it. Standard runnable. So by default, this is disabled, and standard runnable is you've got 2 runnables in the plugin that get launched: comparable runnable and report runnable. And when standard runnable is enabled, that uses report runnable. When it's off, it uses compare runnable, which basically implements comparable and then compares through the service of the job what the priority should be, and that was basically what we talked about on the first video, which is so when that method is on, which is the default, it relies on the plugin, on the service that you've created and the priority that you set on here. So it will fall back to here just before it's trying to sort out its priority to work out with the parameters of the current task, should it be a higher or a lower priority. And that's what that is for. So by default, when it's off, it uses that. If it's turned on, then it will use report runnable, which doesn't compare the jobs at that level. It then uses something called enhanced priority comparator or priority comparator, depending on which type of executor you've used, to do the running task. Sorry. To do the comparison of the reports, and then that falls back into, did you enable the default comparator, If not, then use my crazy method of change max pool size to work out what the priority should be. Okay, so I'm hoping it's kicked in so far. It's making sense. Disable user service priority check. This gets called, so when this is true, that it goes around the houses to do the priority checking, if you set this to false, then it won't use the queuekit user service, which is the alternative method to manage priorities, which is the original method that was written. So in here, if you extend this service and then push it back in through your resources on a Grails 3, a Grails 2 app in Spring Resources, so I've made queuekit user service be my user service, which is something within this test site. In my user service, I've then overridden this process and put my own report names, and probably, I can extend on that as I like. And then that then behaves as the queuekit user service within the plugin, within my site, if that makes sense. This is how you do it in Grails. So this method, if enabled, it will fall back to this method. And you may only want to use this method because if you don't want to really define the priorities inside the reports, which I don't see why you would want to not do it, because you have to declare it anyway. But if you wanted to keep everything centralized and have all your reports maybe going through a case and using one specific case, then you could get around it this way and then declare it this way. And then obviously have the extended service that has your extended method that does its own checks at this point. So it's up to you which method you use. But that's how you need to enable, make sure that's false if you wanted to use that. Emergency executor, if you shut your main executor down, or I'm not sure how it would not work, but then it has inbuilt into enhanced and priority executor only something called an alternative executor. And what happens is when it falls over, it goes into rejection, or even if it gets into a rejection state, it calls a rejection handler, which is within the plugin, and then that uses the alternative executor to submit the task. But with the alternative executor submitting the task, there's no control, and there's no priority, and there's no limitation of how many users can execute a job. So yeah, I would probably just keep this false. Manual downloads, you can probably keep false as well. Again, if the main thread execute is fallen over, and if this is full or somehow this is fallen over, manual download would mean that when people click on an item to download, or a form, sorry, a report to download, it would then just fall back to the web level and just launch a new thread and just request it to go through the same process as all of that, but without all of that to do it. And obviously, again, there's no control, and it's probably far worse than having your existing people waiting, because then they can just go away and click lots of buttons and create lots of threads. So these two methods are, I guess, more around playing around with thread executor and learning about it and experimenting, which is what they're there for, other than anything else. Maybe it will expand someone else's horizon and we can make something better out of it. I don't know. Delete entry on delete is when, if you, by default is off if you wanted to delete the database entry when the user clicks delete, but by default it keeps a record of that, although the normal users can't see those deleted records. Force flood control is 0, 1, 2, and the way it's supposed to work, which I'm having lots of problems with. 0 is supposed to be off, 1 is supposed to be for jobs below the preserved limit, 2 is for jobs that are above the limit and below. And when it's 1, if there's a free channel and there's no one else using the system and it's all lower jobs at higher priority, it will give it the free channels. If it's free channels and it's all lower priority and the flood control's on 2 and there's no high priorities waiting, then all the low ones can take the third channel. But if there's other people waiting and there's other things in the queue, then this thing won't allow them to have that spare channel, or it's not supposed to. Below and above priority limit user, what this is if a user has should have how many threads based on how many actual threads you have anyway, and how many is available for the defined priority level. So above it being, if medium is defined, and above it is low and lowest, below it is high and highest, and how many of those they can have with other users on the system and with flood control enabled. So they sort of all clash with each other, and it tries to make sure there's no, if there's other people involved, then, and this is enabled, then it tries to limit them to this. So if you set this to 1, then the user will only try and take one job if there's other people waiting, or one request, or one running task. Check queue on start. This is part of a schedule that you need to set up in your Bootstrap. Or alternatively, if you don't set it up, you can, if you've restarted your application, then, and there are things on the queue, then they need to be kicked in. And you can go into manually requeue, which basically attempts to requeue all of the different executors within the plugin. If there's any queues, anything waiting for the specific ones, to requeue them and launch them. Disable examples. When you've had enough of all the examples here on this page, you can set this to false and the page will disappear. You won't be able to get to it anymore. So that's just as a security thing if you don't want to have access to it after you've experimented with it. That wraps up configuration. Oh, there's one more actually. Standard runnable. Oh, we've talked about this. Yeah, we've talked about this. Okay, that wraps it up. Thank you. Bye bye.